It has to do with a crime called controlled substance homicide. And what that means is if you have someone who dies of a drug overdose and you can prove who gave them those drugs, then that drug dealer is complicit in their death and can be held accountable in a court of law. It's a pretty rare case to prosecute because do you have evidence of where those drugs came from? For people who are, for instance, using drugs out on the street, usually the answer is no to that. Even for, some of these young people, and I've seen those more so be the cases that are pursued, you've got to have like a text or some sort of communication. And if the person who used the drugs died, that might be the only link to finding out where they actually got the drugs from. But I think that the law itself is critical. I wish it were able to be used more often. These cases were pursued more often, because if you have that kind of accountability for drug dealers, where they can go to prison for homicide, for selling drugs to someone and those drugs kill them, to me, that is something that could possibly dissuade people from dealing drugs if it's used more and more often. Then if you can kind of continue to trace it back, okay, where did that person get the drugs? Where did they get the drugs? And then try to take down a whole chain, you can save countless lives. So that's why the sheriff of San Juan County was so angry earlier this week. He took to Facebook in a really lengthy post, just trying to explain to the people of his county what was going on. He and his office, they investigated a controlled substance homicide. There was a death of a young person who took a drug that was laced with fentanyl. They died. We're able to trace it using cell records to someone, successfully prosecuted this person, only for a judge to give him a freaking slap on the wrist. We talked last week about sentencing guidelines and standard sentencing ranges, how you have judges, they can use their discretion kind of within the standard range and say, does this person deserve a low-end sentence or a high-end sentence? In some cases, I've seen judges give an exceptional sentence beyond the high end. But in this case, the judge actually went to the extent of using their discretion to give this drug dealer an exceptionally low sentence, below even the lowest end of the standard sentencing range, for providing a drug to a young person that took their life. And so we asked San Juan County Sheriff Eric Peter to come on the show and talk about not only his deep frustration with this case, but something that we discuss all the time on the show, which is this frustration, generally speaking, about policies related to public safety that just lack good old-fashioned common sense. Sheriff Eric Peter, welcome to Undivided.
Thanks, Brandi. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm good, and I share your frustration about this case. First, before we get into some of the details, substance abuse homicide, that's a hard case to prove. I don't see those very often.
Yes, I think this is probably the first one I've seen since moving up to Washington State.
Yeah, why do you...
In our county.
Yeah, why do you think that those cases are important for your office to pursue and to investigate?
Well, first and foremost, we need to get justice for the victims and their families. But we also need to try to track down the source of where this poison is coming from. I think everybody would agree fentanyl is not healthy. And we would like to know not just the person who handed the pill to that person, but where they're getting the pill from and where they're getting the drugs from. One person dying is too much. I know death's an inevitability, but not like this. And you definitely don't want to see more people dying from something that can be prevented.
Yeah, and as you said, tracing where that drug came from, it helps prevent further loss of life. And so that's one of the critical parts in investigations like these. So talk about, because this was a pretty young person who died from this fentanyl, correct? Can you tell me a little bit about the facts of the case?
Yeah. When we received, now that it's all adjudicated, we can talk about it now. It's all public record. Deputies were dispatched to a medical call. Someone had an overdose. Young person, unfortunately, was deceased. Our detectives were able to secure cell phone, secure a tablet, and throughout the investigation, we're able to identify the person that provided the drugs to this young person that passed away, and worked the case and ended up getting a warrant for the arrest for the controlled substance homicide.
Yeah, and by young, how young you talking?
I believe at the time of the incident, he was around 16.
Yeah. So when you guys are able to connect it, you make an arrest. Do you try to get information from the suspect about where he got the drug?
We did,
And
and refused to talk to us.
wow.
And the frustrating part is, I'm not debating whether it's this person or other people who have tragedies go on in their life where they had a bad upbringing, didn't, only had one parent or didn't have any parents or were unhoused. Those are all tragedies that, they have to work hard to overcome. But to listen to a defendant, any defendant, sit there in court and say, I'm so sorry this happened, but you refuse to cooperate and give the name of the person where they got the drugs from to help other people not be a victim and die. It just comes off disingenuous. Like, are you sorry, or are you sorry because now you got caught?
Yeah. So you took to Facebook and put a pretty lengthy post out to your fellow community members expressing your frustration with the end result in this case, which, factoring in possible good time, you could be talking about less than 2 years for this individual who contributed to the death of another person. Why did you feel so strongly about the outcome of this case?
I'm pushing 29 years now in law enforcement, and 22 of this in the fourth largest city in the nation. And I've seen my fair share of people dying, either from drug overdoses or from violence, senseless killings. And those never go away, especially when they're young people. I mean, these are images that stick in your head forever. And it's exhausting. And I'm not even the family affected by it. And I did my job for my whole career, being a good officer, being a good sergeant, following policy, not speaking up because it wasn't my place at that time. Sheriffs are elected to represent the people in their community and take care of public safety. And if you don't work in law enforcement, you don't work in the judicial system, and you don't know how it works, it's our job to tell people, hey, this is what's going on. Here's what the sentence could have been. Here's what it actually was. Because a lot of times people come back to law enforcement and say, why didn't you do anything? Well, we did do something. If you have time, I'm willing to sit here all day and explain the process to you. And in a smaller community, the deaths just seem to affect you more. You can't get lost in a big city or in a community like this, like you can in a big city. All deaths are tragic, but here, everybody in these tiny communities, at least on a basic level. And to see people die when life is short enough already, it's so frustrating and disheartening.
And just for the edification of our viewers, you mentioned that you spent most of your career in the fourth largest city in America. You came out here from Texas, right?
Yes, I worked for 22 years with Houston PD.
Yeah. And so, obviously there are some political differences between the two states, but as you note in your post, this really isn't about politics. And we had a case on the show that we've been covering for months about domestic violence homicide, where the guy who took a gun to his girlfriend's brain when she dumped him was looking at 10 years, which was just wild for the family. And you said something in this post that really struck us because we had just been sort of talking about that sentiment. And that is, I've been in law enforcement for 28 and a half years. I never thought I would live in a world where the rights of the persons convicted of a crime seemed to matter more than the rights of the victims and the law-abiding residents of San Juan County. What is to be done about that?
That's up to everybody in each community to make a decision. And where I'm coming from is not a left or right. Part of the reason I left Texas is I'm not far right and I'm not far left either. I think that is a major problem in our country as a whole. Too many people are divided. People talk about working together. Everybody stays on their own sides. I don't know why people can't take good ideas from both sides and just go down the middle on this and make some common sense decisions. You know, too many people nowadays are listening just to respond, to have that gotcha, aha moment, instead of listening to understand. You know, and I'm passionate about talking about that because when I was a young cop, brought up in the era I was brought up in, I am embarrassed that I was the same way. And I effort every day not to be like that anymore. Um, it's just frustrating seeing knee-jerk reactions to making decisions on our laws and not having a constructive down the middle conversation. Yeah. And even if they're well-intended changes, sometimes they're short-sighted and they have unintended consequences.
Yeah, you just basically gave a commercial for unDivided, by the way. I might have to use that as a commercial for the show.
Yeah. I'm good with that. You know, I just, now that I'm in a position where I have a chance to say something, I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I don't stand up and say, and I know it sounds corny, why can't we all get along? Why can't we all just listen to understand and try to make some rational decisions?
Yeah, and as you said, you know, these could be well-intended from the right place, changes to our judicial system, but if the outcome is clearly nonsensical, then there's no shame in reevaluating it. In this case, you know, the work you guys put in to make the connection for a charge that, as I said, is not used very often because it's difficult to prove. Would you have felt differently about the outcome if this suspect had been willing to work with law enforcement to try to connect the dots and get more of these drugs off the street?
So, somebody died. A young person died. And my belief is that that low end of the standard sentence was a very reasonable offer. I think below it is not going to hold him accountable. And I've heard defense attorneys over the years argue, you know, well, prison isn't going to rehabilitate somebody. Prison is a scary place. Prison is, you know, doesn't have the resources for substance use disorders or mental health disorders. So the option is to not send people? I mean, I'm confused on that. You know, if we put them in there and don't have the resources, we fail them. If we don't put them in, now we failed everybody. So if the resources aren't there, I mean, there's money. I'm not arguing what our state, what our country spends money on, but how about investing in the people, not just the people who talk the loudest, not just the people who don't get put in prison, but how about invest in people? If those resources aren't there, how about we put the resources there? Put an effective substance use disorder treatment system in the prisons. Same with mental health. You know, I'm a veteran too. I've met fellow veterans who have other mental health issues and other injuries and end up with substance use disorder. They need the help too. I mean, put it in the system. Don't just throw your hands up and say, well, we're just going to trust their word that they're going to go to these treatments.
It's a good point. One I really haven't thought about, which is, you're right, that's the sort of, oh, well, prison's not going to help them. Okay, well, let's design prison in a way that will help them. And then it's the best of both worlds, right? Sheriff Eric Peter, we do appreciate your time and we appreciate you bringing the community's attention to this case because I think it's important for people to know what's happening on the back end of our criminal justice system. I
do too. You know, people, like I said earlier, I could not go be a hospital administrator. I have no idea how to run a hospital. Someone has to explain it to me. And I spent enough years in my career not talking and not explaining things. And if we don't explain to people how law enforcement works, how investigations work, how our judicial system works, then we're doing ourselves and them a disservice. So
couldn't agree more. All right. Well, you're welcome back on anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandi. I'm very honored and grateful to have the opportunity to chat with y'all today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I like him. He's just right my cup of tea. It's, you know, he had the Texas experience. He came up, he's having the Washington experience, which is obviously very different. And if we can't come together to improve public safety, then what are we doing? But I do appreciate the point he makes there at the end, which maybe I haven't talked about in the nuance that it perhaps deserves. But Okay, for people who want to say, oh, the current state of our criminal justice system isn't helping anyone, incarcerating someone doesn't help them. Well, okay, then what are you doing wrong? If the idea is to put people behind bars and make sure you get the punishment aspect of it, which is real, you have to have punishments when you break the law. But you have that aspect of it. Okay, well, if you turn around and say, we need to do that, but while they're there, we want to make sure that when they get out, they don't recidivate. Well, what are you doing to make sure that that doesn't happen? What are you doing behind bars to make sure they get whatever? Maybe it's drug treatment, mental health treatment. So if our criminal justice system isn't rehabilitating people, then that's a you problem. You don't just let them out and say, well, okay, well, our criminal justice system sucks, so let's just all move on past that. Absolutely absurd.